So we're going to talk about why love alone will not fix someone's alcoholism or their drinking problem.
Yeah, it's a big topic, and I would just say that it's such a complicated brain disease. And I remember when I realized that I was in a marriage with not just Michael, but also his addiction. Love was not enough to get him to stop, and it had nothing to do with love. It had to do with his brain and how his brain was functioning and his reward system was functioning. And that in turn drove my behavior to become incredibly toxic. And my toxic behavior in turn affected not only the man who had the addiction, but the addiction. And it got very, very twisted and very complicated, and love couldn't bring us out of it. It was incredibly painful and incredibly sad. We must see this as a very chaotic network, an emotional network that we need to really deconstruct and understand what our part is. It's like the widgets, the nuts and bolts of how to make something work and how to make it work seamlessly.
Yeah,
it has to do with our behavior.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. I think getting the psychoeducation is huge of what is addiction. It's not a moral failure, but it's something going on in someone's brain, because when you think about love and what is the most loving act I can do for someone struggling with addiction, well, when you have the psychoeducation around it, in my eyes, it's setting boundaries, keeping the focus on yourself, allowing them to deal with the consequences of their behavior and come to terms with what's going on. So hopefully they can make a shift and move forward into recovery or getting the help that they need. When you don't have the psychoeducation and you are coming from a place of fear, so love driven by fear and wanting to fix it, it actually turns into enabling, which perpetuates their addiction because it makes them comfortable to continue on. You have this false sense of control. So for me as a kid, that looked like, oh, I love my dad so much. I want him to stop drinking. I'm going to, and at the time I thought it was his diabetes and low blood sugars versus his drinking. So I was like, I'm going to give him all of my dessert because I love him. And if I give him all of my dessert and his blood sugar stays high, it was actually the alcohol. But at the time I thought it was his blood sugar, then it'll be fixed. And that's the solution. And I'm sure for you, obviously it took on a more adult thought process. But I know with what we were doing to love it out of him, it was actually enabling him.
Yes, and it caused me a lot of anger because I would say to him, if you really just loved us and loved your family, you would stop and you would get help. And he didn't hit a spiritual awakening or a bottom to get that help and to stop. And I was really misguided in thinking that he had control over this. I do feel like self-love is an important conversation to have, because when we think of love, we think of loving someone else. They're both action words. Self-love is an action word, and when we have self-love, we take care of ourselves in the midst of all of this chaos and drama. And what does that look like? That looks like having emotional boundaries. It looks like creating our own safe space. It looks like having physical boundaries, and it looks like getting the help to get there. We're not alone. We don't have to do this alone. It's just important that we reach for help.
And I think this is the biggest pivot anyone can make, is really understanding, because I remember when I was a kid going into my dad and saying, why don't you love us enough to stop? And really truly believing that he did not love us enough, when in fact that was so far from the case. Never in a million years would he have wanted his child to feel that way, or his wife. And I think the pivot is really being able to accept that it's not about love, because with that comes the empowerment of putting the focus on yourself, not taking it so personally, but going into action of self-care. And in turn, it fits together like a perfect puzzle piece of, you put the focus on yourself, they have to then feel the consequences of what their drinking or drug use is doing, and really embrace that
and own their own path in this situation.